In 2023, I started subletting a rental house cabin for a few months when my dad and I were having problems and I needed to move out. The apartment's actual renter was having personal problems, so he left, and I'll just call him my landlord to make things easier. The cabin was a full unit rental and it was paid monthly, which was perfect for my momentarily awkward situation. Technically, it had 2 floors, a small kitchen, a sizable living area, and one bedroom that you had to ascend a short flight of stairs to reach. There was also an odd hatch-like door that you had to open to access the upstairs bedroom. I had been there for a month and had already paid the second month's rent, so I was settled in. The cabin was at the end of a dirt road with a few other cabin-style homes of a similar size. One of the houses was unoccupied as far as I could tell, because I never saw cars parked outside or lights on the other houses, but I knew people lived there. I work 12-hour shifts sometimes, and when I get home, I'm completely exhausted, so we just go straight to bed and watch TV until I fall asleep. This was one of those nights when I got home, made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a protein shake for dinner, and then went to bed. I always close the door in the floor at night because I feel vulnerable or exposed, even though this door wasn't locked. The cabin was intended for one person or a couple. I was watching TV in bed when I heard a voice from below asking who was up there. My heart stopped for a moment as I jumped to my feet, and it sounded like it might have come from outside the house, but it might have also come from inside. I grabbed the TV remote to turn off the TV, and I crawled over to look at the circular window above the bed. It was dark and I didn't see anyone outside, so I said, "Who's there?" Then there was a deafening silence, so I got out of bed and put my hand on the door handle. I opened the door and looked down the stairs, and I even said my dad's name, thinking perhaps he had come over there, but there was no answer. I was so terrified that I turned on the first light switch I came across. The living room lit up as I had anticipated, but I was still thinking that someone else was down there. I turned on the front outside light and looked out the windows, but there was still no one in front. I was awake at this point, so I turned the TV right back on, and not even 5 minutes later, I heard pounding on the door to my bedroom from below. They played angry or like they were meant to frighten me if there was any doubt that someone was in the house. I left the TV on this time and just remained perfectly still because I was truly too terrified to move an inch. The most terrifying thing was that whoever was down there could easily open the door because there was no luck. I lay in silence for about 20 minutes, and when I was comfortable enough to move, headed out to find my phone. Of course, it was not on my nightstand and I might have left it downstairs. I opened the bedroom door and looked down the stairs, and with the TV screens constantly changing light, I could see the living room just a short distance below. I went down the stairs in silence, and when I reached the bottom, I ran out the back door without turning on any lights. I sprinted barefoot to the closest neighbor's home, where I knew people lived, and noted that their lights were on. I repeatedly banged on the door before seeing someone staring at me from the window next to the door. I wasn't sure how long they had been there. He undoubtedly heard me when I shouted through the glass that I'm his neighbor and that I need a phone to call the police, but all he did was stare at me. It was unnerving, and I began to move away from the door when I noticed that he wasn't even answering me, just eerily observing me. There were no other homes in the distance with their lights on as I glanced around the road. I thought, what if that guy had something to do with it? I went back to my rental through the back door, which was closed exactly as I had left it. I went inside, locked it, and turned on all the lights in the tiny house. I looked downstairs for my phone as well as for an intruder, but I was so exhausted earlier that I had left it in the center console. I went back inside, where the TV was still on in the bedroom. I climbed the stairs, and when I reached the top, I saw a man sitting on my bed, staring at the TV. I screamed, and he slowly turned his head to look at me. Before I could see anything else, I ran back down the stairs and outside, now holding my phone. As I waited in my locked vehicle, watching the home while on the phone with 911, I saw a person go by and the house's rear vanishing into the woods. When a police vehicle pulled up, I informed the operator that I had seen someone, probably the intruder, leave the home and go into the woods. One of the officers then investigated the house and the room above. After packing some of my most critical belongings, I swallowed my pride and returned to my dad's home for the night when he inquired if I had any other places to stay that night. The following day, I went back to the house and spent another night there. After gathering the rest of my belongings, I was fortunate that the landlord agreed to return some of my money. He asked me how the man looked and then stopped asking me any more questions, which I found pretty suspicious because something seemed out of the ordinary in that situation. From the creepy neighbor ignoring me to the landlord's sporadic, urgent need to vacate to someone breaking into the house. Perhaps it's all related, or perhaps I'm reading too much into it. Around 11 p.m. on a Tuesday in 2013, I was walking down a dimly street on my way home from work. Since my car had been in the shop, I had to walk 3 miles each day, which took me about an hour, and I arrived home before midnight. I live in a small town in southern Indiana, so after 10 o'clock there are hardly any cars on the road. The only vehicles you ever see are trucks going to Indianapolis. I was less than a mile into the trek when I decided to turn onto a dirt road. Since my house was off the usual route, I had to travel through a number of dirt roads that were encircled by forest. As I was turning, I heard a motor in the distance, and it was approaching very slowly. I could see it about a quarter mile down the road. I just cut off a vehicle that was traveling extremely slowly and had no lights. This didn't seem out of place at first, since there is a very inexpensive auto business in the town where I live that sells second-hand cars and vans with damaged components, such as headlights. I thus thought that this man was one of their customers. While the vehicle continued to go slowly along the main road, I continued to walk down the side road. 5 seconds later, I leaped. When I heard the vehicle roaring, it accelerated quickly, but suddenly its lights were on. I was taken aback, but I wasn't alarmed since the van switched off its lights once again and slowed down as it approached the side road turn, which was approximately 500 feet away. I didn't want to come out as surprised since I was officially freaked out. I just walked down the street more quickly. I kept turning around to check if I was being followed, but then my suspicions came true when I saw the van turn onto the dirt road. I was only 500 feet away from the van, so I started walking much faster. I didn't want to look back, but I did it just for safety, and what I saw scared me to no end. I saw the van stop with the driver's and passenger doors open, and I heard what I'm positive was a gunshot nearby, and I was convinced that this was how I was going to die. I quickly turned into one of the nearby forests and hid behind a large rock after hearing what sounded like a middle-aged man say. She disappeared into the bushes, and to my astonishment, 3 little girls appeared. One of them said, "Okay." I was covering my mouth to avoid making any noise when I heard the guy remark that whomever finds her doesn't have to drink the blood tonight. I wasn't afraid for my life, sir. Instead, I was worried that I would be compelled to join whatever crazy club this was. I had a million questions. Are these females abducted? Is this some kind of demonic cult? And will I join them? I sat behind the rock for what seemed like an eternity, terrified of any noise I could hear. Then, to my relief, I heard a police officer nearby, so I stayed there for safety. When I had the guts to look, I noticed red and blue lights just outside the forest. I ran outside, screaming for help, and the officers asked me, "Ma'am, do you know about this body?" I was perplexed and asked, "What body?" Then, in front of the police car, I saw the most horrifying thing I have ever seen. What appeared to be a young woman in the nude, with blood all over the place and no van in sight. When I couldn't sleep that night, I told the police everything: the car, the man, the girls who had to drink the blood, and they agreed to investigate. I called the police right away and told them what I had seen, writing down the license plate number. As expected, when the police arrived, the van was long gone, but what they told me would horrify me for the rest of my life. We checked the license plate number, and it's a plate registered in South Dakota. But the problem is that we checked with other precincts across the nation, and they received reports tonight that there was also a suspicious van with that license plate, one in Vermont and one in Nevada. My best guess is that it was some kind of cult that used fake license plates to carry out their sick deeds across the nation. But I suppose I'll never know because I moved out of Indiana and now I make sure to bolt whenever I see something suspicious. One in Alaska and one in Texas said we'll call you if we get any more information. The cops left, and I never got a call. My spouse and I reside in a typical suburb with typical professions and lifestyles, surrounded by typical neighbors. We lead what is, I suppose, the typical American lifestyle that most of us were taught by our parents to follow. Sitting down to write this story is already saying something because I'm not a writer, and the last time I typed something out this long was the last paper I wrote in college. However, something happened not too long ago that no one can explain, and it still scares us to this day. My wife, Gianna, and I had a typical day, and after work we decided to go out to eat for a change, and we returned around 9 o'clock. We don't stay up very late on work nights, so by 9:30 we were brushing our teeth, getting ready for bed, and by 10 o'clock we were in bed. At 11 o'clock, we usually turn off the lights, read our books, or watch our show. And tonight, when the phone rang, G.I. told me not to answer it. I agreed with her that someone phoning at this hour couldn't be good news, but I also stated I should pick it up in case of an emergency. I grabbed for the phone next to the bed to do so, but before I could really raise the receiver, it stopped ringing, indicating that the ancient landline was garbage. The caller ID would vanish as soon as the conversation ended, and there was no way to look up the call history. Oh well, incorrect number. However, a few minutes later, the phone rang once again, so I picked it up and checked the screen. It said, unknown number. That seemed strange to both Gianna and myself, particularly after 10 o'clock. I believe that after 9 p.m. is the commonly acknowledged cutoff hour for phone calls. I didn't answer the phone, but as soon as it stopped ringing, it rang again, and this time it was my neighbor Al. He asked me if I knew the man standing outside my house, and I said, "What are you talking about?" He told me to go outside and hung up. I thought it was incredibly strange how he would just hang up like that giant's face when I told her what Al had just said, which was a look of fear. She said, "Don't go out there," and I replied, "I'm just going to look out the window instead." I walked downstairs, pulled back the curtain a little, and looked out into the front yard. Since no one was there, I opened the front door, then the storm door, and went out onto the front steps. I scanned my surroundings, peering into the bushes just in front of the home. Nobody, so I was a bit irritated that Al would call us as a hoax. I went back to sleeping and told the girl that there was no one outdoors, and that Al was probably playing tricks on us. She was as perplexed as I was by this, so I decided to call him. When the phone rang, it said unknown caller again, so I picked it up, and before I could say anything else, Al stated, "Go the outside, there's an individual standing outside your house." He said it in a calm, slow voice, and then hung up. I got up and said aloud, "Okay, what the hell is happening on?" I went back to the window as well as looked through the curtain this time, and this time I saw someone standing directly at the end of our walkway where it met the sidewalk. He had a hood over his head, effectively hiding his in-person blackness. The house phone rang again, so I shut the front door and went to the kitchen phone. This time I saw the caller ID displayed my neighbor Al's number. I answered it, and he said in a much more normal voice, "Hey, I just got your voicemail." What was that about? I didn't call you. I was so confused that I swore to him. He called me twice, telling me about a man outside my house. He sounded even more confused than I did, and a few seconds later he claimed he doesn't see anyone outside my house. The guy outside my home had vanished when I walked back outside to check out the window, so I insisted that Al tell me immediately whether this was a joke. Whether it wasn't, he wouldn't tell me that we would have a problem. I had to put Al on speaker so that GI could confirm that I wasn't going crazy and that we did receive 2 calls from someone who sounded exactly like him. He did the same and put his wife on the phone to confirm this for him. In the end, all he could say was that it sounded like someone was playing a practical joke on us. We ended the call, but I was still as horrified as before. I had to go back downstairs one more time to hang up the downstairs phone, and I looked outside once more. But the man was gone. Neither of us could ever understand this inexplicable circumstance.